Over the last month, you may have noticed headlines about Bitcoin. Headlines announcing that the currency has reached a new record high of almost £30,000 per coin. Indeed, Bitcoin has come a long way since its humble origins. Its value has fluctuated, and on the one hand, it has been praised as a tool for enabling people to escape government interference. On the other, it has been criticised as a haven for criminals. But where does Bitcoin actually come from? Today, I'd like to tell the story of its very beginnings back in 2009. And I'd like to start with an engineer and programmer named Hal Finney. On this particular day, at the start of our story, he was sitting at his computer, waiting expectantly. He can feel the excitement rising in his chest because he knows that on this day, he is going to try to make something new, a new kind of money. In fact, it was not the first time that Mr. Finney had come across the idea of a digital currency. However, his own experiments had made him somewhat skeptical about the possibility of success. Despite this, when he received an email a few months before the start of our story, something in it made him sit up. The email was from a person named Satoshi Nakamoto, and the email was about a new kind of currency called Bitcoin. Hal had been bowled over by the idea of a currency that didn't have to be managed by a bank or another third party. It was a system that resided solely in the computing memory of its users. And most importantly of all, the users could own and trade Bitcoin without providing any identifying information to the central authorities. Now, this was something that was particularly attractive to a man like Hal. He had spent his whole career working on programs that could help people to elude government surveillance. So he had entered into correspondence with Satoshi. He had encouraged him to write the code to create the idea. And finally, on the day at the start of our story, the moment had arrived. Hal typed in the domain name bitcoin.org and downloaded the file to install the first Bitcoin program. It was pretty basic, just a list of Bitcoin addresses, which would represent Hal's numbers in the system. And it also contained private keys, giving Hal access to each of the addresses. There was a send coins function, but that wasn't too much use to Hal, given that he hadn't yet got any coins. But before he could look around properly, the whole thing crashed. Hal wrote back to Satoshi to report on the problem, and within an hour Satoshi had responded with a revised version of it. This time, Hal was able to try out some of the features. He clicked on the most exciting looking button, which was called Generate Coins. Immediately, his computer processor whirred into action. And with everything running, Hal could afford to take a break and go back to his family duties. In fact, Satoshi had explained to him that generating coins could take days, weeks, or even months, depending on the speed of his computer and competition on the network. Hal understood that what had happened was that his computer had logged on to a chat with other computers in the system. Now, at this point, the only other computers in the system were Satoshi's. All of these computers were now essentially in a race to solve a computational puzzle. Whenever a particular computer won that race, it would be allocated a batch of 50 coins. Then all of the computers on the system would be updated. Their shared record would show the number of coins owned by that particular address. When Hal returned to his computer in the evening, he was excited to see that there were now 50 bitcoins next to one of his addresses. And these 50 bitcoins were also recorded in the public ledger that kept track of all bitcoins. In fact, the bitcoins that Hal had generated were among the first 4,000 coins ever made, the rest belonging to Satoshi. The problem was that at that time, bitcoins were worth exactly nothing. But that didn't stop Hal from engaging in a flight of fancy. What if Bitcoin did actually take off? If it came to replace all other payment systems in the world, one day each coin could be worth $10 million. Now, Hal Finney had been involved in the conversation around digitisation for many years. He realised that on the one hand, the internet offered opportunities for people like him to connect with similar-minded people. They also, however, the people in his communities, also feared the way that technology could alter the balance of power between, on the one side, governments and corporations, and on the other side, individuals. Technology did give individuals new powers, but there was constant discussion of how creeping digitisation gave governments and corporations control over that precious commodity, data. The groups that Hal was a member of online, such as the Cyberpunks, feared that governments could use citizens' data. They could harvest this data. For example, in 1993, the Cyberpunk manifesto read, "Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age." And of course, the question of money had not escaped these groups' notice. They felt that the current system was unnecessarily constrained by national borders and the control of banks. And it also represented a major threat to privacy, because any old snooper who accessed somebody's credit card statement could trace all of their movements. Indeed, it's no accident that many fugitives are caught because they have been tracked through their financial records. Now, of course, they could use cash, which was untraceable, but cash couldn't be brought into the digital world. And as soon as money entered the digital world, banks took over, which meant that there was always somebody involved who could trace the payments. The goal then for these online communities was a secure system of digital money that could not be counterfeited. So finally, after many years of failed experiments, it seemed that Bitcoin may just have come along to fill that void. The system was set up so that every Bitcoin transaction and the holdings of every user was tracked not by a bank, but by all the computers of all of the users, and these users remained anonymous. It was essentially a community-maintained database, and it was known as the blockchain, a term that we have come to hear a lot of recently. So in theory, transactions could be completed without a bank, credit card company, or even a regulator. However, even when, on that particular day, Hal generated his first batch of his own coins, the value of Bitcoin as a currency remained just a theory. There were only two sets of computers on the system, belonging to the two founders. And eventually, when nothing seemed to catch on, Hal became worried about the CO2 emissions his computers were causing and decided to pull the plug. Indeed, for several months after the launch of Bitcoin, the currency was limited to a small group of technology experts. In fact, throughout the whole of 2009, Satoshi's computers were still capturing the majority of the coins. The problem was that you couldn't actually buy anything with Bitcoin. So one user decided to give these Bitcoins value. He set up a swap shop offering Bitcoins for small objects like stamps and stickers of SpongeBob SquarePants. Needless to say, it didn't exactly take off. But then, in 2010, more famously, one user offered 10,000 Bitcoins for a pizza delivery. In an aside, that pizza delivery would now be worth over £200,000. Finally, Bitcoin had real-world value. And as it gained in publicity, so the number of users finally began to take off. That year, it went from 3,000 new users in June to 20,000 new users in July. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the detail of the ups and downs of Bitcoin's next few years. There were the creation of mock marketplaces to exchange coins, and the hacking of these, losing some people millions. There's the story of the man who is trying to get the council to dig up his lost hard drive containing thousands of Bitcoins. And of course, there was the quest to uncover the identity of the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto. But unfortunately, that will have to be the subject of another speech. What is clear from this is that Bitcoin goes beyond the headlines of investor hype and digital gold. It has moved a long way since a small group of tech nerds decided to try and give free rein to their libertarian ideas and put them into practice. Thanks.